The transport ship descended through the clouds of Prime, its engines humming with the steady rhythm of interstellar travel. Inside the cramped passenger hold, dozens of young beings from across the galaxy sat in nervous anticipation. They were cadets, each selected from their home worlds to train at the most prestigious military academy in the known universe. The Galactic Coalition Academy had produced warriors, commanders, and legends for over 3,000 years. Vance sat alone in the back corner. She was human, one of only 4 humans aboard this particular transport, while the others wore pristine uniforms provided by their wealthy families or governments, wore something different, something old. A coat of dull, rust-colored steel plates covered her torso and arms. The metal was thick and marked by countless scratches and what appeared to be ancient burn marks. Several of the plates had been welded together with rough seams that showed different shades of oxidation. The cadet sitting across from her could not stop staring. His blue skin rippled with amusement, and his 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he leaned toward his companion, a tall with clicking mandibles. "Look at the human," the whispered, though not quietly enough. "Did she raid a junkyard before boarding?" The made a sound that passed for laughter among its kind. "Perhaps humans cannot afford proper equipment. I heard their planet still uses ground vehicles powered by burning liquid." Kept her eyes forward. She had heard worse. She would hear worse still. The coat felt heavy on her shoulders, but it was a weight she had carried her entire life, a weight she had chosen. The transport shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small window beside her, could see the academy emerging from the mist below. It was a massive structure built into the side of a mountain, with towers of gleaming metal and glass stretching toward the sky. Training fields spread out around it like a green carpet, and she could see tiny figures moving in formation far below. "First time seeing it?" asked a voice beside her. Turned to find another human had taken the seat next to her. He was young, perhaps a year or 2 older than her 19 years, with dark skin and a confident smile. His uniform was standard issue, clean and new. "Yes," replied. He said, offering his hand. "Terran Federation, Earth Sector U. Vance, Outer Rim, Station 47. Whistled low. "The Outer Rim, that's deep frontier territory. How did you get a slot at the academy?" "I earned it." Nodded, respecting the simple answer. His eyes drifted to her coat, and she could see the questions forming in his mind, but he was polite enough not to ask. She appreciated that. The transport landed with a gentle bump, and the cadets began filing out into the warm sunlight of Prime. Followed the crowd, her boots clanking against the metal ramp. The moment she stepped onto the landing platform, she felt the stares. Hundreds of cadets had gathered for orientation, representing dozens of species from across the galaxy, and many others she did not recognize. Among them, scattered like drops of water in an alien sea, were perhaps 24 humans. And every single one of them was staring at her coat. "By the 7 moons," someone muttered in the crowd. "Is that actual rust? The humans sent us a scrap collector. I thought they were supposed to be warriors. She looks like she crawled out of a recycling plant." Walked forward, her head held high. The coat's plates shifted and clinked softly with each step. She had worn it since she was 15 years old, when her grandmother had placed it on her shoulders with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. She knew every dent, every scratch, every burn mark. She knew the stories they told. The cadets were directed to a massive training field where rows of white lines had been painted on the ground. Each cadet was assigned a position based on their home world and species. Found herself standing between and a towering warrior whose scaled skin gleamed like polished bronze. The looked down at her with obvious contempt. His people were among the most feared fighters in the galaxy, their biological armor nearly impenetrable and their strength legendary. Seeing this small human female in her ridiculous coat seemed to offend him on a fundamental level. "Little human," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "You should have stayed on your primitive world. This place is not for the weak." "Thank you for your concern," replied evenly. "I will try to survive." The eyes narrowed at her tone, but before he could respond, a horn sounded across the field. The cadets fell silent as a group of instructors emerged from the academy's main entrance. There were 5 of them, each one a veteran of countless battles. Recognized their species by their bearing and the medals on their chests. An admiral with pale blue skin and enough decorations to fill a small room. A general whose plant-like body was covered in scars. A human commander with cybernetic implants visible along his jaw. A warrior priest in ceremonial robes. And leading them all, a figure that made several cadets step backward in instinctive fear. His kind were rare, ancient, and incredibly dangerous. They were among the first species to achieve interstellar travel, and their warriors had fought in conflicts so old that most other species had not yet evolved. He stood 8 feet tall, with silver-gray skin that seemed to absorb the light around him. His eyes were deep black pools that reflected nothing. He wore no medals, no decorations. He did not need them. His name was Instructor, and he had been teaching at the academy for over 700 years. The cadets watched in silence as the instructors took their positions at the front of the field. Instructor stood in the center, his gaze sweeping across the assembled young warriors like a predator, surveying its hunting ground. "Welcome to the Galactic Coalition Academy," he said. His voice was soft, yet somehow it carried across the entire field without effort. "You have been selected from billions of candidates across the known galaxy. You represent the future of your species, your worlds, and the coalition itself." He began walking slowly along the front row of cadets. His movements were fluid, almost graceful, despite his massive size. "Over the next 4 years, you will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. You will be pushed beyond your physical and mental limits. Many of you will fail. Some of you will break. A few of you will die." He stopped in front of a trembling cadet and stared down at him. "The universe does not care about your potential. It does not care about your bloodline, your wealth, or the reputation of your species. In battle, there is only survival. You will learn this, or you will learn nothing at all." He continued his walk, passing the human section. Stood at attention as his shadow fell over her, expecting him to pass by like he had the others. He did not pass by. Instructor stopped directly in front of her, his ancient eyes fixed on her coat, and for a long moment he simply stared. The cadets around her shifted nervously. Even the warrior seemed uncomfortable with the instructor's sudden attention. "What is your name, cadet?" Instructor asked. "Vance, sir, Outer Rim, Station 47. "And this coat you wear, where did you acquire it?" The mocking began again, soft whispers rippling through the crowd. "She probably found it in a dump. The rust has probably infected her brain." "Pathetic." But Instructor held up one hand, and the whispers died instantly. His expression had changed. Something had shifted in those ancient black eyes, something that made the other instructors exchange uneasy glances. "I asked you a question, cadet," he said, and for the first time his voice had dropped lower, quieter, as if he was afraid of what she might say. Met his gaze without flinching. "It was my grandmother's, sir. Before her, it belonged to her mother, and before that, it belonged to my great-great-grandmother. It has been in my family for 212 years. The Admiral stepped forward, his eyes wide. "That is impossible. That would mean this coat was forged during the—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Instructor slowly reached out one massive hand and touched one of the rust-colored plates. His fingers traced the burn marks, the scratches, the crude welding that held the ancient metal together. And then he did something that shocked everyone present. He took a step backward and lowered his head in a gesture of profound respect. "I know this coat," he said softly. "I have not seen its like in 200 years. I thought they had all been destroyed. I thought none had survived." The cadets looked at each other in confusion. The mighty Instructor, 700 years old and feared throughout the galaxy, was showing deference to a human girl in a rusty coat. "Will someone please explain what is happening?" the warrior demanded. Instructor turned to face the assembled cadets. His voice was no longer soft. It rang across the field like a bell, filled with something that sounded almost like awe. "You mock this human for her appearance. You laugh at her coat because it is old and enrusted. You think she is weak because she does not shine like your polished armor." He gestured toward. "This coat is made of rust steel. Do any of you know what that means?" Silence, confusion. The human commander stepped forward. His cybernetic jaw clicked as he spoke. Rust steel was the name given to the armor worn by the human defenders during the siege of Station, 212 years ago. Several of the alien cadets frowned. The name meant nothing to them, but the instructors, all of them, had gone pale. Instructor nodded slowly. The siege of Station, one of the most brutal conflicts in recorded history. The Horde, 1 billion warriors strong, descended upon the station with the intention of using it as a staging ground to invade the inner systems. Standing in their way were 17,000 human soldiers. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. 1 billion against 17,000. The odds were so far beyond hopeless that mathematically they were meaningless. The battle should have lasted hours, days at most. The admiral spoke next, his voice hushed. "It lasted 3 years." 3 years, Instructor repeated. 17,000 humans held 1 billion warriors in place for 3 years. They fought in corridors filled with fire. They fought in rooms with no air. They fought when their ammunition ran out, using broken pipes and their bare hands. They fought when their food ran out, surviving on recycled water and the dead. He turned back to, and when their armor began to rust from the blood and the tears and the chemical fires, they did not replace it. They did not have replacements, so they welded it together and kept fighting. They began to call them the Rust Steel Legion. They became a legend, a nightmare that the Horde whispered about in the dark. The field was absolutely silent now. When the relief fleet finally arrived, do you know how many humans were still standing? Answered, her voice was steady. 341, sir. 341, Instructor confirmed. Out of 17,000, and every single one of them was still fighting, still holding the line. 341 humans had tied up 1 billion enemy warriors for 3 years and killed over 400 million of them in the process. He looked out at the assembled cadets, at the end, and all the others who had been mocking the human girl in the rust-colored coat. The Rust Steel Legion was never officially disbanded. Their armor was passed down through families as sacred relics. Most were lost over the centuries, destroyed or stolen, or simply crumbling to dust. To wear rust steel today means you are a direct descendant of those original defenders. It means your blood carries the legacy of the most stubborn, terrifying, impossible warriors the galaxy has ever seen. He looked at once more, and this time his voice dropped to barely a whisper. "What was your great-great-grandmother's name, cadet?" His jaw tightened. "Vance, sir, Sergeant Major of the 43rd Defense Battalion. She was one of the 341. Instructor nodded slowly. "I was there, you know, at Station. Not as a fighter, but as an observer for the Coalition. I watched your ancestors fight. I watched them die. I watched them refuse to surrender when any other species in the galaxy would have begged for mercy." He straightened to his full height and looked down with those ancient, bottomless eyes. "You do not need to prove yourself to these cadets, child. Your blood has already been proven. Your legacy has already been written. You wear the rust because your family earned it in fire and blood and suffering beyond imagination." He turned away and addressed the other instructors. "Clear the field. We begin individual assessments in 1 hour." As he walked away, he said one more thing over his shoulder. And if I hear anyone mocking the rust steel again, they will answer to me personally." The field erupted into chaos. Cadets rushed toward each other, whispering and staring with completely different expressions than before. The contempt was gone. In its place was something else: fear, respect, wonder. The warrior standing beside her had gone very still. He turned to face her, his scales no longer gleaming with arrogance. "I apologize," he said quietly. "I did not know." Looked up at him. "You do not need to apologize. You did not know because I did not tell you. The coat does not make me a warrior. It only reminds me of what warriors should be." She turned and began walking toward the barracks, her rust steel plates clinking softly with each step. Behind her, 1,000 cadets watched her go. And not one of them laughed. The weeks that followed transformed life at the academy. Where once she had walked through corridors of mockery, she now moved through halls of whispered reverence. Cadets from every species made way for her. They nodded in acknowledgement. Some even bowed slightly, a gesture reserved for honored elders on their home worlds. But did not want reverence. She wanted something else entirely. "You are holding back," said one evening as they sat in the academy's dining hall. "I have watched you in combat training. You move like you are afraid of hurting someone." Pushed the food around on her plate. The academy served meals designed to meet the nutritional needs of every species, but human food still tasted like processed nutrients. Nothing like the simple meals her grandmother used to make on Station 47. "I am not afraid of hurting them," she replied. "I am trying to learn." "Learn what? You already know how to fight. Anyone can see that." "I know how to survive. That is different from fighting. My grandmother taught me to endure. She taught me to outlast, but she never taught me to lead." Leaned back in his chair. "Is that why you came here, to learn leadership?" "I came here because the rust steel carries a duty. Every descendant of the Legion is expected to serve, to protect. My grandmother served on the frontier patrol until she was 70 years old. My mother served as a field medic during the border crisis. I have not served yet. I have only trained. So train here, train harder than everyone else. Show them what humans can do." Shook her head slowly. "You do not understand. The other cadets see my coat and think I must be some kind of warrior goddess. They expect me to be the best. But the truth is, my grandmother survived Station because she was the most stubborn, not the most skilled. She told me stories about soldiers who were faster than her, stronger than her, better shots than her. They all died because they tried to win. She survived because she refused to lose." Sounds like the same thing to me. It is not. Winning means defeating your enemy. Refusing to lose means standing back up every time they knock you down, even when you have no hope of victory. It means making them pay for every inch of ground. It means being so costly to destroy that they eventually give up trying. Was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "So you want to learn how to win, not just survive?" "Yes, and I want to learn how to keep others alive, not just myself." Their conversation was interrupted by a shadow falling across the table. Looked up to find the warrior standing before them, his massive form blocking out the light from the ceiling fixtures. "Human Vance," he said formally, "I am of the Bronze Scale clan. I wish to make a request." Gestured to an empty chair. "Sit." Lowered himself carefully, the chair creaking under his considerable weight. Up close, could see the patterns in his scales more clearly. They were not just bronze-colored but marked with darker streaks that formed complex symbols. "Your clan markings," she said, "they tell a story." Blinked in surprise. "You can read heritage patterns." "My grandmother had a friend from your world, a warrior named Al who served with her on the frontier patrol. She taught me a little. Al of the Iron Storm clan. He is legendary among my people, one of the few to ever earn the title of brother-in-arms from humans. He used to visit us every year until he passed. He always brought sweets for my sister and me, strange sticky balls that tasted like fire and honey. His expression softened slightly. L, a traditional treat for younglings. It is rare for our kind to share such things with outsiders. I do not think he saw us as outsiders. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before spoke again. I came to ask if you would train with me, Human Vance. Private sessions, outside of the regular coursework. Among my people, it is considered a great honor to spar with a worthy opponent. I believe you are worthy. Considered the request. Warriors were formidable, their natural armor and strength making them nearly impossible to defeat in close combat. Training with would push her far beyond her current limits. Why? She asked simply. Because I have watched you train. You do not fight like other humans. You do not fight like any species I have observed. You move differently. You think differently. And despite what Instructor said about your heritage, I do not believe you are riding on your ancestors' glory. I believe you have something of your own to offer. Extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Took it carefully, his massive clawed hand engulfing her comparatively tiny one. Tomorrow evening, Training Hall 7, bring something harder than that coat. Smiled slightly. The coat is harder than anything else I own. Training with proved to be exactly what needed. The warrior was relentless, attacking with speed and power that pushed her to the absolute edge of her abilities. Their first session ended with on her back, gasping for air, her rust steel coat dented in 3 new places. Again, commanded. She rose and attacked. He threw her down once more. Again. She struggled to her feet. Your movements are efficient but predictable. You always protect your left side. Why? Wiped blood from her lip. Old injury. My shoulder does not rotate as well as it should. Then train it until it does. A predictable weakness is an invitation to death. Over the following weeks, word spread about the unusual training partnership. Other cadets began requesting permission to observe. Soon, Training Hall 7 had become a gathering place for those who wanted to watch the human in rust steel face off against the warrior. Learned more in those sessions than she had in years of frontier training. Was a harsh teacher, never satisfied, always demanding more. But he was also fair, acknowledging her improvements when she earned them. You are faster now, he admitted after their 15th session, and you have stopped protecting your left side, but you still think like prey. What does that mean? You wait for attacks, you react instead of acting. You let me set the pace of every engagement. True warriors do not wait, they choose the moment. The observation struck deep, realized he was right. Her entire life she had been taught to endure, to survive, to outlast. Offense was almost foreign to her nature. How do I change? She asked. Studied her with his gleaming bronze eyes. You must find something worth attacking for, not defending, not protecting, attacking. What do you want badly enough to reach out and take it? Did not have an answer. That night she sat alone in her quarters, running her fingers over the familiar plates of her coat. Each dent and scratch told a story. Her grandmother had spent hours teaching her to read them like a history book. This burn mark was from the first week of the siege, when they used plasma weapons to melt through the station's outer doors. This scratch was from a knife fight in Corridor 17, when Vance had killed 3 enemy warriors with nothing but a broken blade and raw determination. This rough weld along the back was from the 2nd year, when had been caught in an explosion and spent 2 weeks in a medical coma before waking up and returning to the line. But there was one mark that had never understood. A small, deliberate indentation in the chest plate, right over the heart. It was too precise to be battle damage, too intentional to be accidental. Her grandmother had never explained it. Whenever asked, would touch the mark with trembling fingers and say only, "Someday you will understand. When you find something worth everything, you will understand." A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. The door slid open to reveal a figure she did not expect. Instructor stood in the hallway, his massive form barely fitting through the frame. "Cadet Vance, walk with me." It was not a request. Followed the ancient through the academy's corridors, past the training halls and lecture rooms, past the dormitories and dining facilities, until they reached a section of the building she had never visited. The walls here were older, the metal pitted with age and covered in symbols from 100 different cultures. "The Hall of Memory," Instructor said as they entered a vast circular chamber. "Every great warrior who has trained at this academy is remembered here." The walls were covered with holographic displays, each one showing the image and history of a fallen hero. Recognized some of the names. Legendary figures from her history lessons. Warriors who had shaped the course of galactic civilization. Instructor led her to a specific section of the wall. Here, the displays showed human faces, men and women from Earth and the colony worlds, spanning centuries of service. "Your people have a unique place in this hall," he said. "Humans have been part of the coalition for less than 500 years. In that time, you have produced more entries in the Hall of Memory than species who have been with us for." "Is that a good thing?" asked quietly. "That depends on your perspective. Some would say it proves human bravery, others might say it proves human foolishness. The line between the two is often unclear." He stopped before a display that made his breath catch in her throat. "Vance." The image showed a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair cropped short and eyes that burned with fierce determination. She wore the coat that now rested on shoulders. "Your great-great-grandmother was remarkable," Instructor said. "I remember her clearly even after all these years. She was not the strongest of the defenders, not the fastest, not the best shot, but she had something that the others did not." "What was that?" "Purpose. She knew exactly why she was fighting, not for glory or duty or survival. She was fighting for the people on the station who could not fight for themselves. 1,700 civilians were sheltering in the station's core during the siege. Engineers, doctors, families. Vance positioned herself at the main corridor leading to that core and did not move for 3 years. Stared at her ancestor's face. The resemblance was striking. The same jaw, the same determined set of the mouth. They learned to avoid that corridor. They called it the Path of Death. Any warrior who entered it did not return. By the end of the siege, they had stopped trying entirely. Vance had become an impassable obstacle, not because she was the greatest fighter, but because she had something worth killing for. He turned to face directly. "I have watched you train, young one. You have skill. You have determination. You have inherited your ancestors' stubbornness in full measure, but you are missing what made her truly dangerous. You are fighting for yourself, for your family's honor, for the weight of the coat on your shoulders." "Is that not enough?" "It was not enough for, it will not be enough for you." The ancient Instructor placed one massive hand on her shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "You asked what you should attack for. The answer is not glory or honor or revenge. The answer is love." Vance loved those 1,700 civilians with her entire being. She loved them so fiercely that she became unstoppable. Find what you love, Vance, and you will find the warrior your bloodline promises. He released her and began walking toward the exit. "The annual assessment trials begin in 3 weeks. Every cadet will be tested. Some will pass. Many will fail. I expect great things from you, child. Do not disappoint me." The words hung in the air long after he had gone. Stood alone in the Hall of Memory, staring at her ancestor's face, thinking about love and purpose and the small deliberate mark over the heart of her coat. And slowly she began to understand. The trials were coming. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to find what she was fighting for. 3 weeks to transform from a survivor into a warrior. She touched the mark on her chest plate and made a promise. She would not disappoint. Over the next 20 days, changed her approach entirely. She stopped training alone. She stopped thinking of herself as a solitary inheritor of an ancient legacy. Instead, she began reaching out to her fellow cadets, learning their strengths and weaknesses, understanding their fears and hopes. Became her closest ally, his natural charisma and strategic mind complementing her determination. Continued their training sessions, but now they were joined by others. A young named who had never felt accepted by her own people. A warrior called Chitter who struggled with the Academy's emphasis on individual combat when his species naturally fought in coordinated swarms. A quiet named whose plant-based biology made her perfect for reconnaissance and infiltration. They formed an unlikely group. 5 beings from 5 different worlds, bound together by something that none of them could quite name. "Why do you bother with us?" asked one evening as they sat together after a particularly brutal training session. "You could train with anyone. The best cadets in the academy would leap at the chance to partner with the rust steel inheritor." Looked at her new friend. This blue skin was marked with scars that her own people had given her for daring to question their traditional ways. She had come to the academy seeking escape as much as opportunity. "Because I understand what it means to carry a weight that others do not see," said. "My coat tells everyone a story about who I should be. Your scars tell everyone a story about who you were, but neither of those stories is complete. We get to decide who we become." Was quiet for a long moment. "I think I understand now," she said finally. "Why the other humans seem so strange to us. You do not accept limits. You do not accept that things must be as they have always been. You look at the universe and say, why not instead of why?" Laughed. "That's a pretty good summary of human psychology, actually. We're basically too stubborn to know when we're beaten." "It is more than stubbornness," rumbled. "It is a kind of madness. A beautiful, terrifying madness that makes you dangerous beyond your physical capabilities." Chitter's mandibles clicked in agreement. "My hive mother told me stories about humans before I came here. She said you were like fire, useful when controlled, devastating when unleashed. I did not believe her until now." Who rarely spoke, rustled her leaves softly. "Fire burns away the dead growth to make room for new life. Perhaps that is what the galaxy needs." They sat together as the Academy's artificial sun dimmed toward evening. 5 unlikely friends preparing for a trial that would test everything they had learned. Looked at each of them in turn and felt something shift in her heart. This was what she was fighting for. Not a legacy, not a coat, not an ancestor's memory. These people, these friends, this strange, wonderful family she had never expected to find. She touched the mark over her heart and finally understood what her grandmother had meant. When you find something worth everything, you will understand. Understood now. The assessment trials would begin in 3 days. She was ready. The assessment trials took place on Prime's southern continent, in a region known as the Shattered Lands. Ancient geological activity had torn the landscape into a maze of canyons, cliffs, and unstable terrain that shifted without warning. It was perfect for testing young warriors. 1,200 cadets gathered at the staging area as dawn broke over the broken horizon. They had been divided into teams of 6, each team assigned a different starting position around the perimeter of a massive designated zone. The rules were simple. Reach the central beacon before any other team. Survive the journey. Do not die. Stood with her 5 companions, checking their equipment one final time. The Academy had provided standard combat suits for all participants, but she had refused to remove her coat. The instructors had allowed it, though several had questioned whether the added weight would slow her down. "Final equipment check," she said. "Navigation system active. I have mapped 3 potential routes to the beacon based on the terrain data. Ready for combat. If anything blocks our path, it will not block it for long. Long-range sensors active. I can detect movement up to 2 kilometers in any direction. Chitter. Short-range communication network established. We will function as one unit, one mind. Medical supplies prepared. Environmental analysis complete. I have identified 17 plant species in this region that can be used for healing or defense. Nodded, they had prepared well, but she knew preparation only took you so far. A horn sounded across the staging area, and the teams began moving toward their starting positions. Led her group to the northeastern sector, where their assigned entry point waited at the edge of a particularly treacherous canyon system. Instructor appeared before them as they reached the marker. Team 17, he said formally. You will enter the zone in 2 minutes. The journey to the central beacon is approximately 40 kilometers through hostile terrain. You will encounter obstacles, challenges, and other teams. How you handle these situations will determine your assessment scores. He paused, his ancient eyes settling on. Some of you have more at stake than a simple grade. Remember what you are fighting for. The starting signal flashed, and Team 17 plunged into the shattered lands. The first 10 kilometers were relatively straightforward, guided them through a series of narrow canyons, avoiding the most unstable areas while maintaining a steady pace. They encountered no other teams, no significant obstacles. This seems too easy, growled as they paused to check their position. The Academy does not give easy tests. Sensors chirped softly. He is right. I am detecting a large concentration of movement ahead, at least 30 individuals, possibly more. Another team asked. Too many for a single team, and their movement patterns are strange. They are not advancing toward the beacon. They are waiting. Studied the terrain ahead. The canyon they needed to pass through narrowed to about a kilometer forward, perfect ambush territory. It is a trap, she said quietly. Multiple teams have formed an alliance. They are blocking the main route and waiting for competitors to come to them. Chitter's mandibles clicked rapidly. That is against the rules of engagement. Teams are not supposed to cooperate. No one said cooperation was forbidden, replied grimly. The rules only state that the first team to reach the beacon wins. Nothing prevents teams from working together to eliminate competition. Cracked his massive knuckles. Then we fight through. I can handle 30 opponents. You could handle 30 opponents in an open field, said. In a narrow canyon, numbers become an overwhelming advantage. They would swarm us from multiple angles. Even you cannot fight in every direction at once. Then what do you suggest? Was quiet for a moment, thinking. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, telling stories of the siege. The defenders had faced impossible odds. They had survived not by matching strength with strength, but by changing the rules of the engagement. We do not go through, she said finally. We go over. She pointed to the canyon walls rising on either side of them. The rock was steep but climbable, covered in handholds and ledges carved by centuries of erosion. That will take hours, protested. Other teams will reach the beacon before us. Other teams will run into that ambush and be eliminated. Let the strongest teams exhaust themselves fighting. We will slip past while they are distracted. Looked doubtful, but rustled her leaves in agreement. The human speaks wisdom. Plants do not compete for sunlight by growing through obstacles. They grow around them. Sometimes the longest path is the fastest way forward. The climb was brutal. Muscles screamed with effort as she hauled herself up the canyon wall, her coat adding what felt like an extra 10 kilograms to every movement. But she did not complain. She did not slow down. She had made a decision and she would see it through. Struggled more than any of them. His massive body was designed for ground combat, not vertical climbing. Twice he nearly fell, saved only by Chitter's quick reflexes and steady hand. Leave me, he gasped during the second near fall. I am slowing you down. Get to the beacon. No, said simply. We reach it together or not at all. That is foolish. The mission matters more than one soldier. I disagree. They continued climbing. 3 hours later, they reached the top of the canyon wall and looked down at the chaos below. The ambush had sprung, but not as the attacking teams had planned. Two of the stronger teams had arrived simultaneously and refused to be eliminated. The had become a battlefield, with nearly 50 cadets fighting desperately in the narrow space. Incredible, breathed, they have destroyed themselves. Not destroyed, corrected. Distracted. The beacon is still 15 kilometers away, and now there are 40 fewer teams between us and victory. They moved across the high ground, descending on the far side of the battlefield and pushing forward through relatively clear territory. The next several kilometers passed quickly, though not without incident. They encountered a team of who challenged them to single combat, defeated their champion in 30 seconds, and stepped aside with honor satisfied. They crossed a river of corrosive liquid that would have dissolved unprotected skin, producing a secretion from her leaves that neutralized the acid. They navigated a field of pressure mines, Chitter's multifaceted eyes detecting the almost invisible triggers that would have killed less observant teams. And through it all, led from the front. She did not ask her team to face anything she would not face herself. She did not demand sacrifices she was not willing to make. The beacon came into view as the sun began setting. It stood on a raised platform in the center of a vast open plain, a pillar of golden light stretching toward the sky. 4 other teams had already gathered at the edge of the plain, studying the approach. "Defensive perimeter," said grimly. "Look at the ground." Saw it immediately. The plain was not natural. It had been modified, covered in obstacles and traps visible only to trained eyes. Any team that charged directly toward the beacon would be cut down. "There must be a safe path," said, her sensors scanning frantically. "The Academy would not create an impossible final obstacle." "Perhaps the obstacle is not the terrain," suggested quietly. "Perhaps the obstacle is the other teams." She was right. The 4 teams at the edge of the plain were not studying the approach. They were waiting. Each group was positioned at a different angle, ready to intercept any competitor who tried to cross. Another standoff. One of the team leaders, a towering warrior covered in ritual tattoos, noticed group approaching. "Another team," he called out. "5 makes this interesting. Which of us will sacrifice themselves so the others can advance?" "None of us," replied. "We can all reach the beacon together." Laughter erupted from the assembled teams. "Together, little human, this is a competition. There can be only one winner." "Wrong. The rules state that the first team to reach the beacon wins. They do not state that multiple teams cannot arrive simultaneously." The laughter faded as the other team leaders considered her words. "She is correct," another leader said slowly, whose pale blue skin was marked with combat scars. "The rules do not forbid a tie." "But they do not encourage one either," they countered. "If we all cross together, how do we know the Academy will accept the result?" "We do not," admitted. "But consider the alternative. We continue this standoff until darkness falls. Then we fight in the dark, exhausted on unfamiliar terrain. Many of us die. Perhaps one team reaches the beacon, perhaps none of us do." She stepped forward, into the open space between the groups. "My grandmother survived the siege of Station. 3 years of fighting against impossible odds. Do you know what she told me was the most important lesson she learned?" The other leaders were watching her intently now. "She said that the enemy wants you to fight each other. The enemy wants you to waste your strength on petty competitions while the real threat destroys you all. The horde only fell because the defenders refused to turn on each other, even when resources were scarce and hope was gone. They stood together until the end. That is why they won." The warrior studied her for a long moment. "You wear the rust steel. I have heard the stories. Your kind are supposed to be stubborn beyond reason." "We are." "Then why do you offer cooperation?" Smiled slightly. Because stubbornness is not the same as stupidity. I will fight to the last breath if I must, but I would rather win alongside allies than die alongside enemies. The silence stretched across the plain as the sun continued its descent. Finally, the leader laughed, not mockingly but with genuine appreciation. The human is wise. Very well, we move together. If the Academy does not accept our solution, at least we will have proven that we can think beyond their expectations. The 5 teams formed a single formation and began crossing the plain. Traps activated around them, but with dozens of sensors and eyes watching, every danger was detected and avoided. Obstacles that would have stopped a single team were overcome through combined strength and complementary abilities. They reached the beacon as darkness fell, 28 cadets standing together in the golden light. The instructors were waiting for them. Instructor stepped forward, his ancient face unreadable. 5 teams, 28 cadets, you have all reached the beacon together. We have confirmed. The rules did not forbid it. No, they did not. The ancient turned to address all of the cadets gathered before him. In 700 years of teaching at this academy, I have overseen more assessment trials than I can count. This is the first time any team has thought to propose mutual cooperation. It is the first time the final obstacle was solved through diplomacy rather than violence. He paused, his black eyes scanning each face. You were all tested today. Most of you assumed the test was about speed or strength or combat skill. Some of you discovered that it was about strategy and problem solving, but the true test was something else entirely. He looked at. A leader does not simply give orders. A leader inspires others to become more than they believed possible. A leader sees opportunity where others see only competition. A leader builds alliances, earns trust, and transforms enemies into friends. He raised his voice so it carried across the entire plain. Cadet Vance stepped forward. Moved to stand before the ancient instructor, her rust steel coat gleaming in the beacon's golden light. Today you demonstrated the qualities that made your ancestors legendary. You showed strategic thinking, physical endurance, loyalty to your team, and most importantly, the ability to unite others behind a common purpose. These are the traits we seek in those who will command our fleets and lead our armies. He reached into his robes and produced a small object, a medal, cast in metal that exactly matched the rust-colored steel of her coat. The Legacy Commendation, given only to those who embody the highest ideals of military service. In 700 years, I have awarded it 3 times. You are the 4th. Accepted the medal with trembling hands. This is not for me alone, she said. My team made this possible. The other teams made this possible. I know, that is precisely why you deserve it. Instructor turned to address the assembled cadets one final time. Remember this day. Remember what was accomplished here. When you face impossible odds in the future, when you believe there is no hope, remember that a single human in a rusted coat united 5 rival teams and transformed competition into cooperation. This is what warriors can become. This is what the galaxy needs. He looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Class dismissed. The cadets began the long journey back to the academy, but the conversations among them had changed. Species that had never spoken before walked side by side, exchanging stories and sharing rations. Teams that had been rivals now compared notes and made plans for future training. Walked with her team, the medal heavy in her pocket but her heart somehow lighter than it had been in years. You did it, said quietly. You actually did it. We did it, she corrected. I just talked, you navigated, protected us, warned us, Chitter connected us, healed us, it was all of us. Placed one massive clawed hand on her shoulder. My people have a saying, the strongest scale is nothing without the hide it protects. You are the hide, Vance. You hold us together. nodded in agreement, her blue skin catching the starlight. "They abandoned me because I questioned their ways. You accepted me because of it. I would follow you anywhere." Chitter's mandibles clicked softly. "My hive, my swarm, my family." Simply rustled her leaves and moved closer, her alien form of agreement. Looked at each of them, these beings from worlds so different that they should have been enemies. They had become something more, something that transcended species and ancient rivalries. They had become hers, and she had become theirs. She touched the mark on her coat, the small, deliberate indentation over her heart, and finally understood its meaning completely. Her grandmother had carved it there after the siege ended, not to mark a battle or a wound or a victory. She had carved it to remember the moment she realized what she was truly fighting for, not survival, not glory, not duty. Love. The same love felt now, standing among friends who had trusted her with their lives. The same love that had transformed a stubborn survivor into an unstoppable warrior. The same love that would carry her forward into whatever challenges awaited. She smiled and began walking toward the lights of the academy in the distance. Behind her, the rust steel coat that had once been mocked glimmered in the starlight. It was still old, still marked by the stories of those who had worn it before. But now it carried a new story. Her story, and it was only beginning.